We're joined now by Eylon Levy. He's a former Israeli government spokesman. A very good afternoon to you, Eylon.
Hello, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I was following a lot of your tweets and social media messages on Saturday when we saw, thank God, another 4 Israeli hostages released from their Hamas terrorist captors. And it just extraordinary scenes with those young women. I do want to come on to bigger policy issues, but can we just talk for a few moments about what happened on Saturday morning when these 4 young women, one of whom, she'd only just finished her training. She'd been at the military base for I think about 3 days before she was taken hostage, when they were paraded by Hamas fighters who've suddenly miraculously found that they do have a set of uniforms all of a sudden in their balaclavas, and these young women were paraded like a sort of Hunger Games style before a baying mob of Palestinian men. What did you make of that handover?
Incredible relief to get 4 hostages out alive. The doctors are saying that their condition is emotionally and medically complicated, but they're alive. But there was shock in Israel, of course, as you say, at that Hunger Games-like reception. 15 months into the war, the Hamas regime in Gaza is very much in control. Yeah. And when it wants its jihadi fighters to put on their masks and their guns and to go on parade and to parade hostages through the streets, they are able to do that. They even forced the Red Cross to take part in this macabre signing ceremony in front of a banner threatening the destruction of the state of Israel. And so for Israelis, first of all, they were incredibly moved to see the 4 women standing on stage and waving in a show of defiance, saying, we will not be beaten. But it was a reminder
by the way,
of 2 things.
People on social media were saying, oh, well, look, they look perfectly healthy and happy. They've not been starved. It was kind of, they've probably just been, they've just been hanging out at a youth club as opposed to hiding in tunnels and being starved on occasion.
And Hamas gave them certificates of completion to try to make it look like they'd been on summer camp. But we know from the previous hostage release that hostages were being drugged, in fact, by Hamas on tranquilizers to alter their appearance and to make them appear, even being force-fed before they're released, to make them appear healthier than they actually are. But here's the point. Israelis saw 2 things. First of all, we're facing psychopaths. We are dealing with lunatics, and this is an evil regime, and we have to rescue the hostages from their clutches. And 2, the Gaza Hamas regime cannot be allowed to continue to govern Gaza, because as far as we're concerned, it's a year after 9/11, and we can see Afghanistan from our windows. Gaza is that close to people's homes in Israel, and Hamas is threatening to do October 7th again and again and again until we're all dead.
They've made that very clear. Apologies to everyone, the sound of the police siren behind Eylon there. But this is the interesting thing, is that, the people, I mean, especially on Holocaust Memorial Day today, when we talked to the great-grandson of a survivor from Auschwitz, about how so many lies are being told, not just about the Holocaust in the 1940s of Jews, but about what happened on October the 7th, despite all the footage that was put out by Hamas itself, joyfully by them, proudly by them, and people are still denying what happened then. People are denying what's happened to these hostages, including these young women. Again, despite there being a video of their capture, and the women were paraded, it was fascinating, in military uniforms, clearly not theirs, didn't fit them, but they weren't captured in military uniform, they were captured in their pyjamas. Because again, we know Hamas put a video out of their capture, bloodied, beaten, terrified, sitting, a bunch of very young women. I mean, I've got a child this age. I really felt it when I saw that video footage, talking about them as sabaya, meaning sex slaves. And now, look, we haven't had too much detail about what's happened to a lot of the hostages, and we know the reason for that, isn't it? It's about hoping that we don't. It's to save the distress of many of the families who've still got hostages held captive, but also to just try not to do anything to stop more hostage releases. But what we have learned about these young women, the last women to come out, is that one was shot in the leg. She's still got a bullet in her leg, not given any treatment. We know that Emily Damari, she'd lost 2 fingers, wasn't treated, was still bandaged after 15 months. They were routinely starved. One, yes, indeed, that's the signal of defiance.
Iconic.
But one, women talking about being held in a tunnel. One of the young women said she was held in a tunnel in the dark on her own for she doesn't know how long, and then when she was reunited with the other young women, she said, are we alive? Are we actually still alive? She didn't know. And then people are talking so glibly about their time. Well, look, they look well fed, they must be okay.
Yeah, Israelis are appalled and shocked by the level of denial around the world. I remember at the beginning of the war, Israel made the very difficult decision to screen 40 minutes of the atrocity footage to journalists because we were seeing what I called a Holocaust denial-like phenomenon in real time. First, people celebrated Hamas's atrocities. Then when they realized how awful they were, they started covering them up, and now people are downplaying the horrors that the hostages are enduring in Gaza. But it's precisely because we know how horrific those conditions are that Israel has agreed to this ransom. It's not a hostage deal. If someone abducts your daughter and demands a price to get her back, it's a ransom. And Israel is paying a ransom to the kidnappers. We are releasing hundreds of convicted terrorists, including the people behind suicide bombings, people who've committed terror attacks before, people we know are going to try to commit terror attacks in future. But we still have 90 hostages trapped in the dungeons of Gaza, and we need to get them out. And Israelis feel look, just days after October 7th, people started tearing down posters of hostages in cities like London. And that dehumanization, that basic lack of sympathy or empathy has been very hard for people in Israel to see around the world.
It's been very hard for those of us in this country with some semblance of morality for us to watch our fellow Brits doing exactly the same. I mean, especially even the Bibas children, tiny little children, a child that's celebrated, for the love of God, we hope, has marked first and second birthdays and is still alive, but we still don't know. We've got more hostage release, another, the fifth female soldier being released later this week. We hope some people who are unwell, hoping to get more out. But there is still this concern that only, that maybe a few dozen of the people who are still held hostage are still alive. That's the concern.
We know that of the 90 hostages who are still trapped in Gaza, at least 35 have been confirmed dead. Either they were murdered on October 7th and Hamas abducted their bodies, or they were since executed in captivity. In fact, we're expecting to get another 26 hostages out as part of this stage of the ransom deal. According to information in the Israeli media, Hamas has communicated to Israel, 8 of those are dead. We're going to get 8 bodies, and we don't know who they are. We don't know if we're getting back the 2 little Bibas children alive, or whether the country is going to receive 2 little coffins, because those 2 children, aged 4 and 9 months when they were abducted, were executed by jihadi terrorists in Hamas captivity. We're expecting on Thursday to receive another 3 hostages, including 1 civilian Hamas has been refusing to release just yet. But this is just stage 1 of the ransom deal, to get 33 hostages. At the end of it, there will still be another 60 hostages trapped in Gaza. And that's when the really difficult discussions take place over stage 2. The problem being, Hamas wants a full Israeli withdrawal that leaves Hamas in power, free to plan the next invasion on October 7th.
Is the issue.
And Israel's saying that's a non-starter.
And this is the key issue, isn't it? And we've seen in the last 24 hours people in Gaza being able to return to northern Gaza, to, well, not their homes, to where their homes used to be, realistically. That after Hamas finally, again, having lied, having reneged on part of the deal, the clear stages about what they have to do about giving the names of the next set of hostages who will be released and their status. Donald Trump has suggested over the weekend, a complete clear out of Gaza. Why doesn't Egypt? Why doesn't Jordan? Why don't they take these Palestinian refugees? Half of the Jordanian population is of Palestinian heritage. Many were refugees from previous conflicts. Why don't we just basically clear out Gaza and kind of start again? What do you make of that?
Well, Jordan and Egypt have already shot down President Trump's suggestion, and they've done that because they know that historically countries that have taken in large populations of Palestinians developed an internal extremism problem that undermined their domestic stability, right? Like Lebanon, like Jordan as well, back in the 70s. But President Trump does put his finger on a very real problem, and that's this. Hamas is still the government of Gaza. The Hamas jihadi regime is still in control. And it is impossible for Gaza to be rebuilt if its government is still saying that Israel should be destroyed. As long as Hamas remains the government of Gaza, it is impossible to rebuild Gaza without rebuilding Hamas.
No, and there should be no Western government, and I'd say no Arab government either, no Western government certainly, should be contributing a single penny while Hamas is still in charge. However, what are the alternatives? People talk about Fatah or they talk about Palestinian Authority, but there is no moderate Palestinian leadership. We've seen senior figures of the Palestinian Authority welcoming back terrorists released from Israeli jails.
You're right. The Palestinian Authority never condemned October 7th. The Palestinian Authority still has a policy. It pays salaries to terrorists in Israeli jails. Salaries that are pegged to how many people you killed. It's called the Pay for Slay program. And they've said that they'll use their last dollar on that program. We do not think that this is a moderate leadership that is committed for peace. We think that Gaza deserves a government that is committed to peace rather than a forever war against Israel. And here's the critical point. World leaders have said over and over that Hamas can have no role in the future government of Gaza, but it's still in control, as we saw from the images of them parading the hostages. Yeah. And so the question now is, you want a ceasefire, you want Israel to withdraw from the Gaza Strip. Are you happy for the Hamas terror regime that did October 7th, that's threatening to do it again, to continue governing Gaza? Because that's the default mode, unless we see pressure. Unless we see pressure on Hamas and its patrons, Qatar, Turkey, and Iran. Yeah. Hamas has to let the hostages go, it has to lay down its arms, and it has to let everyone rebuild peacefully and put this war behind us.
Are you hopeful that under Donald Trump's leadership in the States with his Secretary of State Marco Rubio, he's made it very clear, he won't rest until Hamas is completely destroyed, that they will stand firm on this issue?
It's not clear at the moment. On the one hand, the Trump administration has figures who have been extremely sympathetic and favourable to Israel, but there have also been voices, including from the Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, that have been less than encouraging. Let's remember, Trump has promised to support Israel going forward, but he's also committed to ending wars. Now, we don't want this war, okay? We want our men on the front to come home. We just know that you can't end a war when you freeze it in place with the enemy that started the war threatening to resume it at a time of their choosing.
And no Western government, certainly not America, certainly not Britain, would ever agree to do that ourselves. So why would we expect it of Israel? That's the thing that always blows my mind. Eylon Levy, really appreciate you joining us, former Israeli government spokesman there.